Hello, Yash. Good afternoon. So yeah, I'm coming from the London office. It's the first time here in Yash, and thank you for inviting me. Marketing guys make always a very aesthetic view on the world, but actually, no, the other way. This is more how my day looks like. The good, the bad, and the painful of digital strategy. So I am probably the most non-engineering guy on the stage, and through the last four, well, this is the fourth presentation you hear today. I'm going to give you a little bit of a meta story of what we're doing, and how strategy and thinking actually complements all that really good engineering and building code. And my background is in social science, and obviously I was always interested in technology and in computers. You see me with my first computer, a chess computer, somewhere in the 80s. And today with our clients, I really try to do three things. I try to understand their business. I try to focus on the user, and whether it's a customer or it's a user, an internal user. And I try to look at the broader technology trends and bring those together. And once you have those together and you start then talking to developers, there's a much richer context. And that's really what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about what digital strategy is. I'm going to talk about some examples of how we put it in practice. And then I'm going to talk also about how I think it works within Endava, and why it's really fun to work in this context with so many developers. So let me start with what you actually need to remember from all this. It's not about strategy, it's about culture. It's about the way we interact with each other. And throughout the presentation, you will see that I'll actually constantly come back to that. So the good, the bad, the painful of digital strategy. What is it, digital strategy? I think actually it's more about digital maturity. If you think about it, digital is something very new. And most of the organizations, and even we as people, we're still trying to catch up with this. Because technology is constantly evolving, and we're still trying to adapt and try to think like, okay, how can we use that in our day-to-day? How can we take advantage of all this new possibility? And how can we implement new things while we have made choices in the past that we're working with today? So, yeah. The way we look at it within Endava is calling it digital evolution. And it's really a roadmap. And it's not just about technology. It's about the people, the processes, and the technology. And you see that across all the industries. All the industries, by adding more technology and more technology to their context, they actually start needing to make choices and need to make changes outside of the pure tech. And this happens throughout different industries, different clients, at different speeds. And because of that, it becomes actually a very, very interesting space to work in. Strategy, and in the previous talk, people started talking about metaphors and wars and stuff. And I tend to stay away from that. I think what it comes down to is actually being more strategic. Thinking, taking a step back, understanding the global picture, the big picture, and then really trying to solve a problem. So being strategic, when is that? When does that come in a good way? At its best, it actually helps to give you a new perspective. Whether it's a completely new perspective, or whether it's a perspective that a team can stand behind and understands. It's a point of view. Then strategy or being strategic is really useful. It's also very useful if you think about it more as a trajectory. You set an ambition and you start thinking how to get there. Whether that point in the future changes or not is in the end not so important. It's more about how are we as a team, whether it's a small Scrum team or whether it's a whole organization, where are we going? What direction do we take? When is strategy really bad? I think it's really bad when it becomes really formulaic, when it becomes almost forced into boxes, and when it needs to be a template, right? Or on the other end of the spectrum, when it's too vague. when it becomes, we're going to reinvent the future of breakfast cereals. What is that? Nothing, right? And you often come across those strategies that are just vague statements. So we want to stay away from that as well. The worst of all is when it just buzzword bingos, when it talks just about these typical words around more engagement, faster, we're going to do DevOps without any context around it, we want microservices. It doesn't mean anything. So that's where we don't want to go. But what it always is, whether it's good or bad, it's painful. It's really hard work. And why do I say that? Why do I think it's really painful? It's because when you want to do strategy and you want to think more strategic about what you're doing, it means that you need to make choices. And making choices is hard because you have options, right? And you make those choices within a world that's full of uncertainties. And there's more and more uncertainties the deeper and deeper you go into the problems. And at certain points in a project, you might be working on it since weeks or since months. Sometimes you start questioning things that will really put you in a position of a very, very difficult, painful situation. The last thing on this is also that looking at a problem through different lenses gives you actually sometimes a complete different view. And this again creates a quite challenging environment. Challenging, interesting, but often quite painful. So let me take you through a couple of more practical examples of where we've been playing in the strategy space recently with our clients. The first one is an example of how we actually have helped a development team come up with a solution for a property developer. The property developer needed to build a new platform, a new big engagement platform. And if you would look at it just from a technical point of view, you would look at their stack and you would look at some requirements and you would start making a choice. But what we wanted to do is actually develop a platform strategy around it and try to help that client realize why they needed that platform. And not just realize, but also articulate. So we had much more reasons why we would then choose certain technologies or certain capabilities. You see on the right, the gray layer is just a reflection of what their business strategy was. The red layer are actually things that we started discussing with them and say, okay, what do you want to do with that platform? Okay, you don't want to just sell houses. Actually, you want to do that in a much more experiential way. You want to give people possibility to dream about what they want to buy. You're a very commercial organization, so you want all those digital touch points to support your sales funnel. So that's much more than the requirement we had originally in the brief. And then community and building a community was another requirement they had. So out of those three, suddenly the lowest layer, which is probably a very familiar layer for everybody in the room, those type of capabilities became actually much more interesting and much more logic for us to say, okay, maybe the first three we need to do in the beginning, the other one we can wait for a couple of months longer, and we had a roadmap. And that's where the strategic or the digital strategy around this project was really, really useful. Another way where we use digital strategy and digital and strategic thinking is in the innovation space. And in the innovation space, it's really about speed. We really work with our clients to help them go much faster from that idea that they have into production. And what we see here is just the idea of using sketches and prototypes, right? And go really build clickable things and build explore what possibilities are for our clients. The last thing I want to show here is another way we help our clients think more strategic, and that's really by using the hackathons. And these hackathons are often actually done either in the delivery centers, like here in Yash. There's a lot of hackathons we've done, or at client site, and then we fly over people, and it's really a mix between clients and developers sitting together. we see that a lot of our clients start actually becoming more and more mature in this space and start changing the format of those hackathons as well. And they have learned a lot over time. In the beginning, maybe they did it just one day. Now some of them do it over a couple of days. We see also more and more that clients and prospects start using the hackathon as a format for a pitch. And that's a quite interesting evolution as technology companies, instead of being just a system integrator, become much more a development partner. A client wants actually to understand what it is to work with you and with your people. And that comes back to what I said in the beginning, that comes back to the cultural thing. And these hackathons are really a really great way to express our culture, but also to learn about the culture of the clients. No, that's one too fast. The last one, this one, I want to talk about. This is where the strategy part and the technology part comes together. On one of our clients, actually, they've asked us to play the role of their CTO. They're a startup, they're very small, they have only 3-4 people, and what we do there is really working with them and helping them make choices that normally the CTO of a company would make. And they almost have handed over the whole technology interpretation of their business opportunity to us. And it's a really interesting space because we go from helping them create the experience and the whole front-end experience to all the way down to an infrastructure level, to how do you onboard partners, to actually developing the application and the proper software development ourselves. And this is again a way where I think strategy and technology are not separate. They're really, really sitting together. And that's a very that's a space that we see happening more and more in clients. So let me then talk a little bit about why I think it's an at Endava technology and strategy coming together is really interesting. So in the beginning, they mentioned it. I've been working for the past 20 years. Worked in consultancy and big corporate clients in utilities and telcos, and in digital creative agencies, and then ending up in Endava a year and a half ago. And I was really, really impressed, I would say, by the fact that when you have people sitting in a room, you don't know who is doing what. Like, it's really, but then in a positive way. That could sound really weird. People just pick up a choice, have an opinion on something that's well informed, and then as a team try to solve a problem. And that is really the culture part. It's why departments are almost a thing of the past. It's more an interest or a deep knowledge in something, and then coming together in these teams and trying to work and create value for clients. The other thing that's to it is that when we create that value, we need to package that up in a story as well. And throughout the presentations, I saw that a lot of times people refer to the fact that they had an idea and then they had to communicate that, whether it was in their Scrum team, whether it was to the client, whether it was to a group of people like here. So as technologists, we're actually also needing to be storytellers, and we need to tell our story because that's the way we can also start getting more and sharing the experience, but also getting critique. Something that always has been very, very popular in a design context, for instance, where people critique each other's designs. This is also something that you see happening more and more in the technology. And then the last thing that we are is also change agents. And for people who don't recognize him, this is Buckminster Fuller. He used to be one of the bigger thinkers, very, very innovative. In the 70s, he was already thinking about sustainability and worried about what was happening with climate. And he used the metaphor of a trim tab. Now, a trim tab is if you have a ship, and I talk about a large shipping container, if you want to move that, actually it's a very little part at the end of the ship that moves, and then there's that starting that makes the change of the ship. You have the same in an airplane where on the wings you have a little bit of it's not a full wing that moves. That trim tab thing, that metaphor is really interesting. Sometimes it just takes one person in a scrum team, or it takes one scrum team in a whole organization that works in a very waterfall way to drive change. And again, this is not just a metaphor plucked out of the air. This is something we've seen with our clients in the past, where some of the teams that start working in a different way actually influence the whole organization, and the whole organization start learning from it. So becoming storytellers and being these change agents is really the or some of the most exciting things that I've seen within the culture of Endava. And if I have to summarize what I think a really strong culture is that helps organizations be much more strategic about everything, it's a mix between an attitude of trying to think holistically, but also a behavior of being really critical, and a behavior of being at the same time collaborative. And lastly, I think it's always hard work. There's a lot of effort that goes in a lot of the things that you see. Sometimes just the result, but to get there, it always takes time. But it's a very fun journey to be on. So thank you very much for having me here in Yash, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Great talk. Thank you very much. Can you explain how digital strategy mixes with Agile? How far ahead of regular development does strategy start?
That's a very good and interesting question. There's a lot of debate. The What we traditionally would say is that you of course want to know what you want to do, right? You want to set out a direction before you start a pure agile process. You also want to work with the client through some of the ways of working. But from a strategic or also a more creative way, we typically say that you work one or two sprints ahead, because you want to create already something that developers can understand and can see and then can work with. What the trick is in that is that you don't stop sprints ahead, but that you actually stay alongside, and that you always have enough creative and strategy when the team is working, and that you actually blend in and work together.
How can we, as developers, have a bigger impact in driving strategic decisions along with project stakeholders and become a business partner for our clients?
I think that summarizes actually the whole point of this presentation. Strategy is not something that should sit in a separate department. Everybody in the room here can be or can act more strategic. And it's really about using a certain language and with clients, and about communicating not just on a code level, but about the business outcomes of the project you're trying to achieve, that you start in that conversation, and you start gaining the respect from your business partner as a business partner, from your client as a business partner. The way we try to solve that is also by just adding some more people, sometimes non-developers, in the teams, and by just creating these mixed teams.
How did you handle clients who aren't open to new processes or out-of-the-box approaches?
Huh. You fire them. No, no, that's not true. It happens. Absolutely, it happens. And I think what works best is demonstrating that there's another way. And in some of the examples, I talked about how we drive innovation, and try to just time box and say, in 6 weeks, we'll show you that there's another way. Some clients are stuck in their processes, or the decision making around change is just too difficult for them. And I think as a partner to a client, you need to appreciate the difficulty in that world, but also give them an easy way to try to find an alternative. And often if you demonstrate that there is another way and demonstrate very fast that you can do in another way drive value, then I think they're open to understanding and trying.
Okay. Can you explain the path from moving from mission to vision to strategy and finally to roadmaps? How do you turn a vision into a strategy?
Yeah, great question again. And so there's a couple of really good frameworks, and often we use those frameworks, vision, mission, values, and then the highest level, the vision is really more where does a company wants what does a company believe in, right? And often the vision is a statement of an CEO together with a mission that's contextualizes that. Then what does that then mean in a world? What does that mean in a context? If you think about the roadmaps are actually much more implementation guides of a strategy. Where the strategy in itself plays is in this translation between those high-level ambitions of a company and what you're actually going to do. And the space that we often play in is not in the business strategy, but actually in the digital strategy. A lot of companies have a business strategy. They know where they want to go. They need to work on more top-line revenue, or they need to cut costs. And they have, from a business point of view, they know what they want to do. But often then they jump immediately into a technology question or into a vendor question. And there's a space in between where we actually talk about which digital capabilities they will need to build and how they should deploy those digital capabilities. And that's really at the heart of where we look at digital strategy.
Where do you see digital strategy going? What is the future for digital strategy?
Well, I hope that the future of digital strategy is just strategy, just as digital is not a channel anymore, and the whole organization or organizations are more and more supported by technology. There's very few organizations where technology is not a very important factor of their present or at least of their future. So I think you see a fading of what pure digital strategy is, and it moves either into strategy as a whole, or it goes very much into implementation and into the digital implementation or the technology implementation, just because it becomes so important. On one of the slides there was a mentioning of how companies in the previous talk, how companies start embracing more DevOps, for instance. This is a good point. Like if companies start more embracing that, their whole structure is changing, and the way they will then be able to absorb technology and technology changes is changing. So just taking that decision, maybe somewhere on board level, impacts the whole flow from strategy to technology implementation.
How does one become a digital strategist?
Don't. Again, I don't think that there is a specific road to this. I would hope that everybody in this room feels, by listening to this, that they actually can be more strategic in their day-to-day job. And that's even, that would be the most important thing, is just being more, thinking more about the issues we do, or what we do every day in a more strategic way. For the rest, I think there are some core attributes around being a strategist, and I think this is about trying to analyze the world around you, trying to summarize it then, and trying to also actually make complex things simple, so people can understand them and can then act on them. And that comes back to the change agent. If you bring simplicity to complexity, then hopefully it's much easier to start acting on it.
How do you work with customers who want to work with specific technologies just because they are the latest?
Yeah, very, very good question. We know them all, right? There's a new fancy thing, whether it's on a conceptual level, or whether it's an architectural pattern, or whether it's a pure technology or a vendor. A conversation around capabilities is often the easiest way to go around it. When when a client asks you which specific software package or which specific technology they should choose, if we talk about what you want to do with it, what's the capability you're building, and then also contextualize it, what's the context around it, all these things will have an influence on whether it's the right choice or not. I think being technology agnostic at front is so important. And in the recent years, I've worked a lot with architects in the beginning of those strategy conversations, where we were just not talking about technology, but we had people with very deep technological understanding in the conversations.
What are your thoughts around creative-driven organizations, where, for example, the CEO or founders are designers rather than traditional business or technical people?
I think they're very interesting in the sense that the CEO of an organization or the founder of a startup, there is no requirement to be one or the other. If it's people with a good idea and passion and drive and enough charisma to lead a team, then they should just do it. And I think what you often see is that there's obviously a bias in an organization and sometimes in an organizational culture that comes out of the, the the founder and what they're thinking. But I think you have nowadays founders from any background. What's important is that they find people that complement those skills. And if you have a designer as a founder, then they will need a very close technology advisor, just as the other way around, where a pure tech founder, which I've met a lot when I've been working as a mentor in accelerator programs, where you have pure tech founders, but they are very interested in getting advice on more on user experience or sometimes on the business side. So it's all about finding your own weaknesses and complementing them with the right advice.
Okay, I have two questions. I think I can combine them. What is the most painful experience that you've dealt with? And the other one, but it's the same. Did it ever happen to you for a certain strategy to fall apart when working for a client? How did you handle it?
Yes, it absolutely happens, and sometimes you realize it actually only later. I think this goes back a couple of years, but at certain moments, especially back in the days where social media was really booming, and we all were thinking that you could develop a business completely based on Facebook likes and on interactions in social. I definitely have written quite some strategies that went into that direction, and we were really actually all as a business just learning, and realized then later that sometimes those things are either not sustainable because they require, for instance, far too much content, which is actually really expensive for a lot of companies to create. And so the business economics behind some of those strategic ideas were just not realistic. The way to go around it is that I think nowadays we're all in a culture of much more building prototypes and testing and learning much earlier on, and that's probably the best way to mitigate it.
Okay, thank you. And one final question, which is kind of if you can give us an advice on how we can become partners for our clients, given that we do nearshore and we don't really live close to the clients or the end users.
Yeah, I think there's an openness for clients to communicate through different channels as well. I think there is a need for face-to-face, but that face-to-face doesn't need to be there all the time. I think the nearshore dimension of it is actually is not what this is about. I think what it is about demonstrating that we can out of a nearshore location, add value to clients on every level. And the way I've seen it working is by just making blended teams. A lot of our teams with clients at client side or in the delivery units, we'll have a mix between whether the clients coming over here or people from us flying over to clients at certain moments in time. The main thing is really about the messaging and about can we start talking to clients on their business level, and can we start having conversations with them about value that they're really interested in. And if they want to know the detail of some of our technical work, then we can absolutely expose that. But not in every conversation that needs to be exposed.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.